Hello, welcome to part 4 of our animation course. In our last video we made a simple skeleton for our spaceship to begin setting up a frame that we can use for our animation. So now let's start attaching our geometry pieces to their associated skeleton joints. Because we're dealing with a rigid surface, we don't necessarily have to do any kind of bending with joints like we would in a character where you have the elbow bend and the skin has to kind of deform where the bend happens. Since there's no bending, we can simply select the ship frame, hold down the shift key and select our root joint and press the P key. And by parenting with that shortcut key the ship frame to the root joint, when I select the root joint now, you'll see now I also select the ship frame and can move the ship frame with the joint. So you can parent like that. We can also undo this and we can do what's called a rigid bind, where if I select my geometry, hold shift and select the root joint again, go to skin, rigid bind, options. I'm going to edit, reset this to get default values here. I'm going to bind to, instead of the complete skeleton, I want to bind to the selected joint. And then I'll click bind skin. And so that has bound this geometry to the selected joint with rigid bind. So now when I select this joint, you'll notice my geometry is not also selected because it's not parented, it is bound. And when I move the ship, it still moves with the skeleton. So both those methods work. It just depends on your preference. I kind of like binding it because it's a little bit cleaner, easier to see. You don't have to see the selected geometry when you select the joints. So it's kind of cleaner visually whenever I'm moving the ship around. I don't have a lot of big wireframe in my view. And also it can be easy to get rid of the bind by just selecting the geometry and going to skin, detach skin, and then it will remove itself from the skeleton and go back to its original position. Like for example, if I were to move the ship over here, and I know we haven't done the rest of the pieces yet, but I'm just demonstrating this. And then I decide, you know what, this is a huge mistake. Let's unbind the ship. And I go to skin, detach, and it goes back to its original position. So undo all that. So now we're back to our default position. My ship frame mesh is rigidly bound to the root joint. And we're going to go ahead and do the same for the rest of the pieces for their respective joints. So for our cockpit glass, I think I will do the parenting method for it since it's just kind of by itself over here. And I just realized we didn't name our cockpit opening joint here. Let's go ahead and name that while I'm thinking about it. We'll call it cockpit hinge. So I'll select my cockpit glass here, hold shift and select my hinge joint and press P to parent. So now when I rotate this hinge joint, it rotates the glass. And because the hinge joint is parented to the root joint, when I move the root joint, it will also move the glass itself. I think I'm also going to use the parenting method for the gun barrel stuff, just because I think it's a little bit easier to see. So I'm going to select the gun end over here, hold shift and select this end joint, press P to parent. Same with this cylinder, hold shift and select this joint and parent. This cylinder, select this joint and parent. So now when I select this joint and move it, I just noticed a weakness in our skeleton here. I don't necessarily want this cylinder to move with this one, so we might have to rethink our skeleton a little bit, and that's okay, that happens. So instead of this joint being parented to this one, I might want this joint to also be parented to the root down here. So if I select this joint, hold shift and select the root, and press P, you'll see the parent has changed. Now this joint is parented to the root down here instead of the other gun joint. So when I move this gun like this one can be moved independently, like so. And because they're both connected to the root, they both move with the root, which is what we want. So that means I need to change these down here as well. So I'm going to select this joint, hold shift and select the right wing joint over here, and parent this one to that one instead. So it's going to shoot across here with this joint to this gun part. Same thing with this one. I'll select this joint, hold shift, select the left wing joint, press P, and parent those together. Alright, so now I've done a little bit of a tweak to my skeleton. I've discovered an issue with it and I was able to easily fix it, so that's good. Let's move on with our parenting and binding. Again, I'll do the same with these gun pieces. I'll parent the end of the gun to this joint here. Select this middle portion of the gun and parent it to this joint here. And the back end of the gun parent it to this joint. Again, do the same with the other side. And I'm just hitting the P key. I select the child object or the child that will be parented. Hold shift and select the object that it will be parented to and press P. So the order of it is important. You want to select the last object you select, it will become the parent of the previous objects you selected. Okay. So now we can do our flaps. The flap should parent to the flap joint here, or we can also do rigid bind, either way. I'll just do parent because in this particular case I think it's easier. So now we can rotate our flap joint and see if we need to adjust its orientation any. I think that looks pretty good. Do the same with this one. Again, we'll just do a little rotation test. Looks good to me. So then we'll select our wing geometry, hold shift and select our wing joint here and press P to parent and test its rotation. So this one is a bit off. So this rotation needs to be up a little bit. So let's undo the parent, grab this joint, make sure we undo the parent thing. There we go. I'll go back to the component selection and we'll rotate that local axis like we did before. Probably just need to just shift it up slightly. So the goal is that whenever we move the wing, let's try it now, it doesn't pull away like this. We want it to kind of be oriented with the cylinder. Okay, it took a little bit of finagling, but I think we got it close enough. So it bends like this. So then we need to do the same for the other side. So we know we're going to need to adjust this probably since we mirrored it over from the other side. So what we could do, try and save a little bit of time, is unparent these pieces here by selecting them and pressing Shift P to unparent them. Then we can just delete these joints, mirror them across again, and then parent these back together. So just delete these. We'll use our mirror joint command again. Go to skeleton, mirror joint. Looks like we got some geometry weirdness. That's okay, we just select them and delete them. And then we can reparent these back together again. See? Much easier that way. Fix it once and then just mirror it across. So now let's select our root joint here and we can move our ship around and we can see that all the pieces are accounted for. So we can move our root, rotate our ship around and have it fly, and everything will move with the root. So now what do we do? So we can do a couple different things. We can add a control handle for selecting the ship. So instead of having to select the root joint over here, I can just select this handle that's over here on the left side outside of the spaceship, so I don't have to necessarily display the skeleton while I'm working. Just depends on what you'd like to do. I'm going to select my root joint here. I'm going to go to component selection mode. The question mark selection mask is still active. That's why you're seeing all these local rotation axes to grab. But we're going to shift over here to the one next to that and say select handle components, and we'll turn off the question mark. So with this little plus sign selected, you can see that we have lots of little pink or purple crosshairs up here, and there's one on each joint. It's very small. We'll do a marquee selection with our mouse over the root joint. We'll grab it, this little crosshair right here, and I can move that crosshair back behind the ship like this. And this is a selection handle. By default, everything has a selection handle at its pivot point, but you can grab those selection handles and move them to make the selection process a little bit easier. So now that the selection handle is moved back here, so I'm going to select my root joint, go to Display, Transform Display, Selection Handles, and now my selection handle has been displayed out here. So I can just grab it like this, and I'll select my root joint without having to try to select it while it's within this geometry. So I can even go to Show Joints and hide the skeleton. I can still grab this little handle and still select my root joint for my skeleton without my skeleton having to necessarily be in the scene. And this little selection handle will not render. You'll never see it in the final rendering of your animation. It's just a nice handle to use while you're working. You can create similar handles for other things, for example the cockpit opening and closing, but I think we're going to do something else for that, which we'll cover in the next video. So I hope you followed along and are able to understand everything we're going over. We're just kind of setting up all these different control handles and shortcuts and stuff so that whenever we start actually animating the scene, it'll be really quick and easy. I'll see you in the next part.